So the interview. So congratulations for getting that far. You got your resume together, your cover letter shined, and you've been deemed qualified for the job. Um, so now they're seeing if you are going to be a fit for their team. So you need to go in to your job interview knowing that you already went over one hurdle. And in this workshop, we're going to talk about how to prepare for that interview. We're going to talk about various types of interview, how to communicate your best image. We're going to help you answer some key questions and how to handle some difficult questions. We're going to talk about a STAR method and then what to do after the interview. But you need to just stop and congratulate yourself and say, wow, I have an interview. Isn't that awesome? I've gotten this far. And that's a big deal because if you talk to other job people who are looking for their next opportunity, you will notice that they send out hundreds of resumes and they hear nothing. So what do you do before the interview? And what you do before the interview is almost, if not really more important than the interview. It's the prep, right? So you need to research the job, the employer. Go on LinkedIn, go Google the company, do everything you can. Go to the company's website, learn about their culture, learn about their mission statement, really know them, and then review the job posting and make a list. On one side, you have these are the skills that they're asking for. And then on the other side of the paper, these are how I meet those skills. And as you're doing that list, think of stories, think of examples that you can use to highlight that you have that skill. So if one of the skills is to work with a database, a CRM, a customer relations database manager, what did you do to do that? What skills do you have? What's a story about how you use that? And what value did you add to your past employers, right? Then also check your attitude because you can't go into an interview thinking they're not going to like me or I don't make it. You have to be positive. You have to sell yourself. It seems a little crass, but you need to think of yourself kind of like that bar of soap or that vacation plan that you see those commercials on TV, right? You need to be proud and sure of yourself and you need to sell yourself. You also need to look good. And I would also suggest you need to line up your references ahead of time. Tell people who are going to are willing to be references. Tell them that you have this interview coming up. Tell them that you might be asking them um, to be your reference for this specific job. So, what does looking good mean, right? Well, most interviews nowadays are virtual, at least for the first one. Um, and we'll talk about that when we talk about the types of um, interviews. So remember, research the employer, go to their website, know what your skills are compared to what skills they're asking for, and have stories or examples of how that's going to how you can illustrate those. Check your attitude and look good. All right. So, types of interviews. There's a telephone screening. Many companies have an HR person call and just double check what you said in your resume and cover letter. And then they're also checking for attitude. Do not do a phone screening while you're driving. Do not do a phone screening while people are screaming in the background or your dog is barking. If it's not a good time and it's not a good place, it's totally acceptable to say, I'm sorry, this is not a good time. Can we schedule this? Right? That's really important because you want to shine. You want to shine throughout the process. The interview starts with picking up the phone and saying hello. And on that end, you want to check your voicemail message, right? I've called people and their voicemail messages said, hello, this is Scooby Dooby Doo, and leave your message, please. We'll get back to you whenever we have time. Not professional, right? So after we get done with this workshop, check your phone voicemail message. Check what it says. It should be professional because you never know when they're going to call or who's going to call and if you'll be there to answer it, right? So check your voicemail message and also never do a phone screening when you're driving or you're not in a good environment. In-person screenings can be either in-person or virtual. They're more than likely scheduled. They might send you an email and say, congratulations, we'd love to talk to you. Here are some dates that are available. When are you available? Always send back more than one. And then before the date of your in-person screening, check your tech, right? So a good example is Jason and I got on the computer a half hour before this session to see if he could see me, I could see him, if he could hear me, I could hear him, you guys could hear us, and there were still issues, which we've worked around, but you don't want to be doing that before your interview, right? You want to check your background. So you don't want something cluttered. What I often do, what I did when I was doing virtual interviews, is that I turned my table around so that I had a plain background behind me and I cleaned off the wall, or I had a very simple picture because everything in the screen of your monitor is going to be seen and it's going to be used to judge you. It all tells a story about who you are, from how you sit in front of the screen to what you're wearing to the ambient noise to the background. So you want that to be plain and simple. You want to make sure that your sound for your computer is good. You want to make sure your bandwidth is good. So if you do not have ample bandwidth at your house to be both visual on the screen and talking, then you want to go someplace that has that. And many career force centers have rooms that you can take your laptop to and use to do in-person interviews. So that's another good reason to check out your career force center. But make sure you check on all of those beforehand. And then your dress. If you've done your research and you've gone to the website and you might even know people who work at the company, you'll know the dress code. And you always want to dress one step above. So if it's casual, where people wear t-shirts, you might want to wear a polo shirt. If it's business casual, you might want to wear, if you're a man, a button-down, a shirt, a button-down shirt, but you don't necessarily need to wear a tie, maybe a jacket. But you always want to come off one step above and you want to come off professional. As a woman, you don't want to have a lot of makeup. You don't want to have a lot of jewelry. You want to be very simple because remember, again, 85% of communication is nonverbal. And you never know what you're doing, what's in your environment, what you're wearing will speak to the person who's interviewing you or the people who are interviewing you. So you want to be always as professional as possible. Selection interviews are usually second or third, and they might be in person, and they still also might be virtual. I've talked to people who have been in a virtual meeting with 2 or 3 other candidates. And so it's not only how you answer the question, it's how you interact with everybody in the room. Behavioral interviews are where they ask you specific questions to see how you've behaved in different situations. And we'll talk about those in more detail when we talk about STAR. For example, are the more obvious are if you're going to apply for a welder, they might want you to weld to see a welding sample. But when I was looking for training jobs, I was given a bunch of definitions and questions to answer before the interview. So I went to an in-person interview. I was given a piece of paper with a bunch of questions. I was given a half hour to answer them. They came back into the room, they answered, they looked at the answers, and then we talked. So you never know. It might be even that you give a sample training session, or if you're a coding job, they might give you a simple coding project. Peer and group a group or peer interview is usually with people that you'll be working with, and it might be as simple as going out for lunch, right? You do not want to order anything messy. You do not want to order anything expensive. You want to order simple food because they're going to be asking you questions and you're going to need to talk. And so the whole time, which includes the walk from the employer to the restaurant, you're ordering, you're eating, how you interact with the different people in the group, that's all part of the interview. And also remember, the interview starts from the minute you get into the building, and it how you treat everybody from the security guard to the receptionist. That's all part of the interview. Many employers, I have a colleague who said she was interviewing people for a job, and they had a candidate that they really, really loved, fit all the qualifications, came off very personal, but she always checked with the receptionist beforehand. And she went and asked Gladys, how did Fred do? And Gladys said, well, he came in, he was kind of rude, he sat down, he talked too loud on his phone, he was screaming at someone. He didn't, and then he just got up and left when you called him. So I didn't have a very good first impression, and that cost Fred the job because Fred didn't treat everybody along the way well. So you want to make sure that you do that because it's might be a little bit uncomfortable, but you're being judged from the moment you walk into the building until even after you leave. And we'll talk about how to follow up afterwards. But you need to just always keep in mind that you've passed the first hurdle, right? You are qualified for this job, or they wouldn't be interviewing you. So now they want to know what kind of team member you are. So you want to be genuine. You don't want to put up a front, but you also want to be polite and honest. So communicating your best image, right? So you're showing good signals and you're showing, and I like to say showing and sharing because you don't want to be lecturing. You want to be showing and sharing all your wonderful skills and qualities, right? And you want to tell stories because people remember stories better than they just remember facts. You want to always, sorry, lost my train of thought. A good way to remember stories, this you can't do in an in-person meeting, but a virtual interview, you can put Post-its all over your screen with different examples that will help you answer the questions. And you want to finish strong. So you always want to have questions to ask and you always want to follow up. And you want to use I statements. because they want to know what you can do, but you also want to use statements that you were part of a team. So I did this along with the rest of the team, or I did this as part of this team, because they're interviewing you as a team member. So the nitty gritty, right? Handling the tough questions. You want to, one of the methods of doing that is the sandwich method. So I'm going to stop sharing for a minute. Um, Jason, did you have, um,
How are we doing?
yeah,
So far, Sandra, no one's had any questions. So I know you're doing an amazing job. So just one comment about your suggestions, and they think it's a great idea, which I know it is. Well, um, but otherwise, right now, we don't have any real burning questions yet. But
okay.
oh yeah, no, I take that back. Carl, thank you. Are there any special preparations or information for public employer interviews?
Um, so I think, are you meaning the state of Minnesota um, as an employer? I know that at Deed, and I think some of the other organizations, they always interview with a panel of at least 3 people, and they all have the same questions. And they alternate asking you those questions, and you're scored points on how you answer the questions, and it's your total points from answering these questions that determine your standing. And they're not allowed to ask questions after you answer. So and that's done because they want to be fair and equitable. And so it is your job to make sure that you answer the questions by folding in your skills and by highlighting what you can do that's in the job posting and the questions. So sometimes the questions don't seem related to the specific skills in the posting, but it's your job to fold those in and then not to be freaked out if they don't ask you questions afterwards because they're really not allowed to. At the end, when you ask specific questions, they can answer those to a certain extent. Um, so sometimes interviewing for a state or public job is different. I hope that answered the question. I don't know specifically about the city of Minneapolis, but I'm guessing it's the same. All right. So the sandwich method, positive, negative, positive. We are hardwired to remember the first thing someone says and the last thing someone says, not what's in the middle. So if you think about any job review you've had and the boss goes on and on and on about how wonderful you are, and then they say, but, and they talk about areas of growth, which everybody has. And you go home and you say, oh my God, I had such a horrible review. And you don't remember all the good before the but. So that's what the sandwich method is meant to try to work around. And you want to anticipate the question. You want to be prepared. You always want to be positive and honest. But the important thing is to keep it brief and to focus again on the skills. I can't say that often enough. These are the skills they're looking for. How can you help us in our industry with these skills? So a tough question is, tell me about a weakness, right? Everybody loves that question. Well, um, when I'm asked that question, I say, well, for many years, so I would be applying for a job as a trainer. I've taught a soft skills class at Stillwater Prison. And one of the things that we did was an assessment called True Colors, where you're either gold, orange, blue, or green. And I came out I came out green. Green are into research and knowledge and really learning about the issue. And for many years of my life, I thought I was a procrastinator. So this is the negative part. I thought that I always waited to the last minute to do things, and I thought that I was a procrastinator. But what I found out taking this assessment was that I really always wanted to get more information. Read one more book, talk to one more person, check out another article, Google some more information. And so now, with that information in hand, I set 2 deadlines for every project. The first deadline is this is when you have to stop researching, sweetheart. This is when you have to just say what you have is good enough. And then the other deadline is the real deadline. It's when I have to get the work done. And since I started practicing this, I've not felt like a procrastinator. So I started with the positive. This is a skill that I had. This is what I've learned teaching this skill about myself. This is the negative behavior, the procrastination, and positively corrected it. And you need to anticipate those questions. So we are going to send you a list of questions that you could prepare for your interview. You can also Google, and you'll find out Googling that you'll get, if you get 200 hits, you're going to get 200 lists of questions, and you're going to feel overwhelmed and go, how can I prepare for all of those? Just pick a few. And what you probably find out is that if you prepare for 10, those 10 will prepare you for the other 400 questions out there. That's what being prepared is. And I would even suggest that you answer the questions out loud, because hearing your voice, hearing it outside of your head, having your lips talk is a different feeling than going through it in your head. And if you're the type of person who is visual, I would even write them out. Write out your answers and then say them. And as you're trying to figure out answers to those questions, again, have that job posting there. What are the skills, right? So give me an example of when you were multitasking on 2 projects that had tight deadlines, right? So what are the skills are they asking for you? And then put those skills in your answers, right? You can never show that you can do what they're asking for enough. But the best thing to do is to be positive and to be really honest. So if they ask you a question that you can't answer, try to find a way to answer it, or just say, at this time, I can't think of an example. Um, Here's an example of something that's close to this, or that I think talks about part of the job. Always keep it brief. A lot of times interviews are only a half hour. And so you don't want to go into detail. Another tough, so, and then you always want to focus on your skills.
Sandra, I can hear you loud and clear.
Oh my God.
Yes, so it was a hardware problem on my end, everyone. It was a issue with the cords. So just so you know, so I'll be able to interact with Sandra now back and forth as I should have. It's just, sometimes I'm a little bit rough on my equipment once in a while. So 100% on me, everybody. Sorry about that. So Sandra, I don't know if you answered already, but there was a question a little bit about um, jobs in areas that are like design or creative. I'm not sure if that you've addressed that or
No.
not, but you may want to, yeah, something about, interviews for particularly like creative professionals, but we may want to wait until the end for that one.
Okay, why don't we just do it now because we
Okay,
started.
sounds great. Sounds
So
great.
what is the question?
So, questions or any tips when you're interviewing for people who are creative professionals that may have to present a portfolio or present creative output that they've done, anything like that in those types of interviews.
Um, so that's almost as if it's a sample interview, which was one of those that we talked about. And I'm also a creative person, and I have a lot of output, but not all my output would be the right fit. So whatever you put in your portfolio should be taken into consideration the job that you're applying for. So if you're applying to work at a food magazine and you have stuff about food, then I would put that in there. You might want to also include a project that you're really proud of. What you need to um, be considerate of is anything that's proprietary, that's not able to be shared. And then I also forgot to mention early on that you should always go to in-person interviews with copies of your resume, at least 5 copies. And that might sound silly, but I went for an interview once and the person came up and said, "Oh, I'm really sorry. We have to reschedule. Our printer is down and we couldn't print copies of your resume." And I was able to say, "I have 5 copies. Would that help?" And they said, "Sure. Yep, that'd be great." So we had the interview and I was able to get the job, and I showed ahead of time that I was organized, and I came prepared, right? So for the creative portfolio, you need to, again, do your research and know what the company is looking for. And bring, if you can, and bring a small portfolio, maybe a couple copies of it so you can share it with all of them. If it's a virtual interview, you might want to have a PowerPoint or whatever the Apple Computer equivalent of is, so you can show your work. It's always better to be able to show it on a screen than to hold it up to a camera. All right, so what's STAR? STAR is a great way to organize information in your head. It's a great way to make sure that you have a story. It's all about the situation, the task, and the results. So, and it's always good. Remember the skills, you know. So if I was asked, give me a time when you were teaching a class and the audience didn't seem to be really involved. So again, when I taught at Stillwater Prison, I was teaching different groups at the prison. You know, they had a group that did computer classes, learned computer skills. They had a carpentry class that learned carpentry skills. They had a welder's class, and the welding class didn't feel like they needed interpersonal skills. They didn't feel like they needed to learn how to work with others. And their instructor had the same attitude, the welding instructor, which didn't help. Um, so my task was to get buy-in from the welders, the welding class, um, because it would have been a really long 6 weeks of them just sitting and staring at me. So I needed to find buy-in. So what I did was I talked to the welders union and asked them what skills they look for when they hire people, or they, you know, their apprentice program. And I talked to a couple companies that hire welders and asked, you know, when an employee doesn't work out, why is it? And I was able then to bring in that testimony to the class. And the results was that the class saw that there was value in at least minimally learning how to get along with people. One of the things we taught was how to work with difficult people, how to present your ideas. And so, because I was able to give them information why that was important, they were willing to buy in minimally, but at least they bought in. So, you need to practice these. And again, you need to figure out the skills, right? You need to figure out what skills are they asking for and how can you highlight them in your answers. And there's a whole bunch of key interview questions that you can use this for? Tell me about yourself. When they ask that question, they're not asking that you're the oldest of 12 kids, that you have 3 children, that your parents are at hospice. They don't want that kind of information. You want to answer that question specifically related to the job. So again, if I was applying for a training job, I would say, I have 25 years experience teaching at the Textile Center, and that includes developing and giving classes. I've been doing virtual, I have a certificate in e-curriculum development, and I have been teaching virtual classes for the state of Minnesota for X amount of years. So everything I'm telling them is related to the job that I'm applying for, right? You need to do that. Why are you interested in working for this company? You know that, other than a good answer would not be because I need a job and I have bills to pay. You have read their mission statement. You would say, I am really impressed by the company's work in this field and their mission statement. And I had a colleague who did that, and the person on the panel said, I didn't even know that was part of the mission statement. So because you've done your research, you can say why you want to work for that company. Okay, what is your major weakness? We address that. What are one of your major strengths? Sometimes we have a hard time talking about ourselves and what we think is good or bad about ourselves, especially what we think our strengths are. And I would suggest to you that you ask 5 to 10 of your family, friends, former colleagues, how would they describe you in 1 to 3 words? And then you'll have this arsenal. So if they say you're a great problem solver, and you aren't necessarily saying it, that I'm a great problem solver, you know that people think that of you. And you'll be surprised at what you hear. And people are more than happy to share. And you can even say, I'm going to have a couple job interviews. I'm trying to prep. Could you help me? What do you see as a major strength? What do you see as a major weakness, right? So, and that will help give you verbiage, and it will be then easier to think about it. Can you give an example of how you solved a problem? And it might even be more detailed, like how did you solve a training problem? How did you solve a coding problem? If you're going into a design field, how did you interact with the client to understand what they wanted from the design? Where do you see yourself in 3 years? I would say working for you, working at XYZ company, helping sales improve by so much percent or whatever, based on the job description and the company that you're applying for. Any questions, Jason, before we go on?
So far, there is one that deals with how to handle the questions that come up related to salary requirements in the interview setting. And that's, of course, a very common concern and question. You may want to tackle that now, Sandra, because I have a feeling a lot of people in the group are probably have
Right.
confronted something similar.
And that's a research. So if you go to Career One Stop, you find out the span, right? What's the wage, the lowest to highest in the Twin Cities. And so I would never answer it specifically this amount of money. I would say that people with my experience in the Twin Cities are making this range. Um, they ask that. I've had very few interviews that have asked that, but I know people have different experiences. But you never want to be totally exact. And it might be asked because you have experience up to here and they're wondering if you're willing to get a job here. Take a cut and pay. And so you need to communicate that. So you could say, the range for someone in this job is this in the Twin Cities. I know that in the past, I've been at a different level, but I really believe in the mission of this company, and I really would like this new challenge and to work in this department. Um, Hopefully that will be good enough. But what I would do, because every area within the state of Minnesota is different, is I would contact somebody specifically at the Career Force Center for your area of the state. Because what's happening in northern Minnesota is different than what's happening in southern Minnesota and in central of the state. I hope that was somewhat helpful. Jason, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so let me start the video here. There we go. The one thing I would just add is a lot of times your strongest hand in interview settings, or I'm sorry, in salaries questions, come after the interview, where the employer wants you. You've sealed the deal, um, but they're approaching you. So usually, trying to give a market-based range that you can find, as Sandra just mentioned, at Career One Stop, gives you the best answer in that interview setting. Because, if there's one thing I usually say is know your worth, and know the skills, because those are valuable skills you have. That's why you're interviewing. But try to give data-based information on those in a range, because that's going to be kind of inside that range where you're going to want to negotiate later.
Thank you. All right, so you've had the interview, right? You answered all the tough questions, and you should never, ever, oh wait, one more. Why did you leave your last job? Nobody's asked about that, but that might come up, and you never, ever, ever want to say anything bad about a former employer, a former boss, a former coworker. Um, if you were wrongfully terminated, I would, again, those are very situation specific questions, and I would contact you. And I'm not trying to pass the buck, but they are very situation specific questions. And I would contact your local career force center and I would talk to somebody. I would either go in or talk to them virtually, because a lot of times how you answer that question is not just the words that you're saying, it's your body language, it's your face, it's the tone of your voice. And so that's a very important question to practice with somebody else who can give you feedback about how you're coming across. Um, but even if you were wrongfully terminated, I would never ever say anything bad about an employer, a boss, or a coworker, because they might think, oh, they're going to do that to me. Just like we said at the beginning, you want to remain positive, but you want to also be honest. And there are ways to answer that. One way is to say there was a reorganization, or that my job was no longer pertinent to the company. But these are, again, situational jobs, the situations are unique to all of us, and you need to talk to somebody in person about that. The most important thing to step away from this workshop is please never, ever be negative. And before you leave the interview, they're going to say, do you have any questions? And part of what we're going to send you is questions to ask. So one might ask, what's the next step? Who do I contact to find out where I am in the process? What does someone who has this job look like if they're successful? Or why is this job now open? What is the day in the life of this job like? All kinds of questions. You should have at least 5 to 7 prepared, but you'll probably only ask 2 to 3, depending on the time. But you always want to ask questions. And you always want to ask at the end, what's the next step? Right? So you want to know they're going to make a decision in 2 weeks, 1 week. And if it's a virtual a meeting, you want to make sure that you get people's emails or names. So someone asked, do I need to wait till the end of the interview to ask the questions? It depends on the tone of the interview. If it's a state job, and I'm thinking it might probably be similar for the city and the county, they have their list of questions that they need to get through. And then you ask your questions at the end. If the interview comes off more conversationally, you can ask the questions as they fit in with their questions. Um, and you and I'm going to share a bad example. I mean, a bad experience I had. So I was interviewing for a job, and I asked the woman who was interviewing me, who would have been my supervisor, could you tell me about your supervision style? Because I had just come from a job where I had a micromanager and I was curious. And she couldn't answer the question. And I felt terrible about putting her on the spot. And the other person who was on the panel was someone who reported to her, and she just smiled. I did not get the job. But so you also want to be careful about the questions you ask. So before we go on to post-interview, any other questions about the interview itself?
So far, nothing about the interview right now that we couldn't address near the end. So I think we can keep it going.
All right. And as a review, remember to be positive, honest, and to talk about your skills, because that's what they want. They want to know how your skills will help their business and how will you return their investment with what you do for the company. So you need to recap the interview to your references. You need to say, I always send the posting. I always send my references the resume and the cover letter, and I let them know what we talked about during the interview. Besides thanking them profusely for being willing to do that. You want your references to be informed. You also want your references to be adequate or the right references for the job. Jason and I do another workshop about interview, and he has an example where somebody wanted him to be a reference and talk to points that he had no experience with the individual. And so you have to make sure that the people you use as references can address what the job is about and what they're asking you to do. If you need to get people's names and you need to send thank you. So there's all kinds of stuff out there about sending thank yous. Some people go to their car if it's an in-person interview and write the thank you notes and then take them back in and give them to the receptionist. It is totally fine, and it's even more efficient and it's faster to send emails. And when you send a thank you, you should highlight, it was really great knowing you. I mean, meeting you, it was great getting to know more about the company. I'm, really excited to use X, Y, and skill to help you meet your sales goals or to create a successful campaign. Or so be specific and fold in what you talked about during the interview. And make sure that your grammar is correct, your spelling is correct, and make sure you address the person how they want to be addressed. So sometimes their email will be Melinda Smith, but Melinda goes by Maddie, right? So when you email Melinda, say hello, Maddie, because that's how she was addressed at the interview. All right. Any other questions? I'm going to stop sharing so I can see your face, Jason.
So, one question that came in is when there are separations that happen in your past that are outside of everybody's control. Maybe it was a workplace safety problem. Maybe it was a corporate decision that made up people redundant. Whatever. How would one handle, briefly putting that question to bed in the most kind of
Succinct way.
yeah, the most concise way. Yep.
Yeah, you could just say there's been a reorganization of the company, and my job was deemed redundant. I once had a job that they decided for cost saving manners, they were going to take my job and divide it between two staff who had been there longer. And so I was a casualty of reorganization. Um, and that's why I was looking for a job. I had another job where the owner retired and sold the company, and the company that bought the business only took one person who knew the CRM database, and everybody else was deemed redundant. Um,
One more question, Sandra, that came in. There was a question relating to how to talk about your transferable skills if you're moving from one type of career pathway to a different career pathway that may be a whole new professional track for you, and how to articulate your what you can bring to the table, even though it's a different kind of job market or skill set or something like that.
You might want to address that elephant in the room right away. So when they ask you to tell you something about, tell us something about you, you might want to say, I've spent 20 years in this field and I've accumulated, I have these skills that I'm now very excited about using in this area. And I like the possibility of the challenge and bringing a different perspective to future roles. And then as you answer questions, the star-based questions, when you talk about, the situation, the task, I never remember, the action and the results, you can say, this is what I did here, and this is how I see it could be applied here, and pick your situations where someone doesn't have to have a really wild imagination to see how it would work. I mean, if you have been in the service industry and you were a wait person for X amount of years and now you want to go work at a call center, there's no jump with how you've dealt with angry people or mean customers or needy customers at the restaurant to how you would do that at a call center, right? Because in a restaurant situation, you have to work fast, you have to get the food out, you have to get the tables turned over. And a lot of times in call centers, you have to do so many calls, right? So that is an easy thing. So when you're thinking, when you're preparing, look at your skills in the industry that you were at and see how you can highlight them in the new industry that you want to apply for. How are you doing?
Good. We're coming close to the conclusion of our time together, but one of the questions that just came in is it appropriate to take notes and names down of an interview team or search committee that you're working with, and so that you can kind of jot down just as they're asking questions as well.
Right. And it's definitely okay to take notes. If you are a little uncomfortable with it, you can always ask. You can say, is it all right if I take notes? Some people think better. So I, I'm doing a lot of research and stuff about introverts versus extroverts, and introverts like to think. And so that's one reason to be really prepared for the interview. But if you write down the questions, that also gives you time to pause and think about what is said. So I tend to just do it out of the course, but I also, depending on the vibe I get, I always ask, is it all right if I take notes during the interview? And if it's an in-person, you can always ask people for their business cards. How we do?
And then I'm just going to put a little plug in if you want to for our attendees. Head to where there. This is not the end. careerforcemn.com/events. You can find a whole lot of other services and a whole host of other information that's relevant to you at our website. And so take a look and find your local career force and take advantage of all the services that we have for you out there.
One of the great things on that site is a calendar of job fairs all over the state. If you're worried about transferring from one business to another, you can take a skill and interest assessment and those line up. They give you verbiage, right? So you could say, these are my skills, this can be transferred here. And on Career One Stop, they have a job comparison thing. So you can put in one profession and then another, and you can see how you can transfer those skills. So there's a lot of depth to careerforcemn.com, and you could easily spend a lot of time there. So please check it out and check out your local Career Force Center. Wouldn't you just love to have a virtual meeting with Jason and have him go over your resume? So please check out your local places. Any last minute questions?
Doesn't look like any of them, but I'm sure you'll have more questions that will filter in afterwards. So again, Career Force MN, take a look at us and get in touch with us. We love to work with you. And again, there are more creative job search modules out there for you. They are on Tuesdays. So please check out more creative job search modules for you. Otherwise, remember that we will be emailing you out a lot of this content tomorrow. So keep a look at your email inboxes. You'll see it there.
And happy 4th of July, everybody.
Yes. Take care, everyone. Have a good day.